Good morning. Now, unelected usury scammers and their multinational minories, and I got the wrong teeth in, rule countries, unelected civil servants run countries, and governments are there to give the masses the illusion of democratic choice. Whatever political party can afford the best public relations gets the vote. The EU employs the best public relations consultants our taxes can pay for, and it's very convincing. Without public relations or propaganda, countries would be unable to fight wars. It's probably one of the most powerful weapons known to humanity. Again, thanks to public relations, we now have our youth and the heart of thinking prancing around worshipping a death cult called man-made global warming. The UK's recent election had the choice of a blatant liar or someone that wanted to ignore the country's vote to leave the EU and have another referendum. Not exactly a choice, eh? Thanks to public relations, the blatant liar got elected, and in my view, a strange cult has appeared whereby people wholeheartedly believe the blatant liar when he says the UK will be leaving the EU. Today, I'm joined by Caroline Stevens. Now, she was the campaign manager for Leave EU in the referendum. Now, Caroline, will the UK really leave the EU on the 31st of this month, or is it one huge farce?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on your show again. And will they leave the EU? Well, I mean, you know, there's a bigger fish to fry than the EU. So that might sound a very politically or a typical politician's answer. But behind the EU, because the EU is also a facade, behind the EU is the United Nations. So even if the EU was to fold tomorrow, then the United Nations would still exist. So whilst it was sold to the people as in the 70s as a trading bloc, you'll find that a lot of these trade deals, whether they're with the EU or without the EU, they're all part of the United Nations New World Order plan. So you take the facade away and you'll find it's like there'll be another door, you'll enter into another door, and it's the United Nations. And that sort of leads me on to a video I did yesterday. And I was thinking, well, I looked through the United Nations Agenda 2030 because we're almost at 21 now. And so looking long term ahead, 10 years, it's in our lifetimes. And what are they planning for us? So it's like reading the end of the book to find out, you know, what's actually the storyline in the book, if you see what I mean. So what are their mission statements? And of course, they had statements saying they wanted to equalize with gender equality. And they're planning various events around the world. And these events are not necessarily within the EU, but we're all contributing to this gender equality goal. And then what else have we got? We've got the climate change. We're all contributing to this. In fact, the EU is really, it was just, perhaps it was just a cover. It was a Trojan horse, if you like, for something much bigger.
Well, that's right. I mean, Mikhail Gorbachev, the ex-leader of Russia, or whatever you call him, he actually said that the EU was the Politburo that has moved from the Kremlin to Brussels. That was what he said. Can't disprove that. He actually said that. And in my view, it is the Politburo, because I think that communism mutated. And people think, oh, because I'm anti-EU, oh, I'm anti-Europe. No, I love Europe. I'm a European. I think, but it's where it is now. We have traitors in power. And I've often wondered if we drew a line and then implemented the 1848 Treason and Sedition Act and brought these traitors to court, how many MPs would there be left in the House of Commons?
The thing is, what people don't realise is that the MPs have no power whatsoever. Since we became a bankrupted nation in the 30s, we've actually been, these are just little puppets. They really are. And the hand that's inside those puppets is the banksters and the globalists and beyond, you know, the higher beings, if you like, or they think they're higher beings.
But have they ever been, I mean, has Parliament ever been for the people? Because I've said this before, Edward I, Longshanks, he abolished usury. Now, for our viewers that don't know what usury is where you basically, how can I say, I mean, I'm not a banker, but I'll try and explain it as simple as possible. Supposing I got a loan off of you, Caroline, for £100, and you said, okay, there's your £100, and then I came back and you said, well, there's interest on this. There's an extra £10 to pay. So, okay, £110. And then you pay your £110. I say, no, it's compound interest. It's now £115. And I'd never end paying off a debt. So you'd be paying off a debt that doesn't exist eventually. And it was Oliver Cromwell which reintroduced usury. And of course, the setting up of the Bank of England in the 1694, which has put generations into debt slavery. And what we've got now is the country is forever in a financial crisis. I mean, I've never known it not to be a financial crisis. And politicians that have tried to end usury, such as Abraham Lincoln in America, and a gentleman whose surname begins with H in Germany, and they say Kennedy, depends on what you read, I don't know, but he tried to introduce debt-free currency into America. I'm 50-50 on that one, whether Kennedy did or not. I've got to read up more on it. But it seems that every politician knows that we're slaves to these bankers who really do rule countries. And they're, of course, industrial minions who are sort of under them. So really, we don't live in a democracy because whoever you vote for is a puppet to the usury scammers. That's it. I hope I've explained it.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. That's exactly it. So, you know, a lot of people have high hopes for us to be helped by the Americans. But it was interesting that in America, or rather, I mean, they're still part of the United Nations. So there's a job description that just went up on the internet on the 26th of last month. And the position is called a disarmament, destabilization, reintegration officer. And it's quite interesting. They want somebody who is going to work with actors, UN actors, I think it said. And yes, UN actors. So they're all acting, and it's for us to stop this game, really. They are looking at people who are mainly female because, of course, the UN is pushing for females in the workplace, which, you know, it's that I'm happy for anybody, for the right person to get the job, but not positive discrimination. That cannot be right.
I 100% agree.
What's the UN doing here? I mean, you know, as I say, this year, there's a local MP to here. She actually stepped down from the Tory party, or certainly from Parliament last December. And of course, people were on the Brexit side in particular so jubilant that certain MPs have left the Houses of Parliament. But what they don't seem to really comprehend the fact that these people go into Parliament for a reason, and then they've done their worst, perhaps, or they've made the right connections for the next step of their journey here on Earth. And this lady, she's now a lady called Claire Perry, Tory MP. It's a Tory MP. You could actually put a teddy bear in that seat and wearing blue, and it would get elected. So it's a very safe Tory seat. So there was no reason from that perspective of her leaving Parliament. Now, I don't know what reason she's given, if she's given any reasons at all, but within a few days, we now find out she is some sort of climate change ambassador. So it's just, I wouldn't say it's a revolving door. It's just a pathway. These people are selected and groomed and promoted and moved along from place to place for the powers that be. So that's what she's going to be doing. There's going to be this big climate change conference, and it's going to be in Glasgow. So you see, it's not just the 28 EU countries. You know, it's like the Marrakesh Declaration. We didn't sign it with just the EU countries. We signed it with the African countries for the Africans to come and live here.
Well, this is the lunacy of the situation, because to me, if you talk about immigration, people say, oh, you're racist. No, they are, I don't like the word racist. It was invented by Trotsky in 1930 to stop the Soviet satellite states noticing masses of Russians being moved into their states to destroy their culture, because that is communism's main objective, is to destroy the family unit and destroy the culture of a country, so that then the people have only got the state to rely on and look to. That is the objective, and people can't see that. And Africans and people from the third world and us, we're being used as pawns. That's the way I look on it, because the people that come here should be in their own countries, if they're educated people, such as doctors, lawyers, or whatever. No, sorry, lawyers are not educated. But if they're accountants or whatever, they should be boosting up their own countries. And what's happening now is I don't believe the world is becoming overpopulated. There's a book which I didn't put in my notes the name of, but it's just been written, where it's showing that we're not having enough children and the world is facing extinction because, for example, in Bangladesh, in 1970, most women gave birth to about 5 to 8 children. Now that's down to 1.4. So they're not actually the next generation. They're actually older.
I'm not worried about that side of things so much. It's the fact that the UN agenda, where we have been saying to people, forget about the politics side, forget about the Boris and the Nigel and the Doris, as I called him the other day. It's a case of that is just entertainment, whilst the serious stuff is going on behind the scenes. And because of the usury, you know, you've covered the usury, because they've been lending money all these years, because they've been merchants, they've been the traders. They've, you know, I was watching a film about the Jesuits a couple of days ago. So you've got the Jesuits, the Talmudics, the Vatican. They're all into bed together. And, you know, the secret, it mustn't stay a secret anymore, because we are facing, as a race, annihilation.
That's 100% correct. I mean, you've got the Copenhagen plan. Please look that up on the internet, and that is actually it's chapter, line, and verse. He had this plan to literally wipe out the European culture and race, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's unfair on the immigrants. It's unfair on us. But what gets me is that if we destroyed usury and banned it, we could have a situation where the population we could solve two, shall we say, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, metaphorically, and that is what they did in Germany, and that is the country could afford to give interest-free loans to people buying a property. And what they did was that if they had 1 child, a quarter would be knocked off of the loan. If they had 2 children, half would be knocked off of the loan. And if they had 4 children, they would get the house free, basically. And that's the way it works. And it worked very, very well, because the way they worked that out was, you see, if you're not paying back a massive debt, you can then, the country, the wealth of the country would be the efficacy of its work and what it does. So,
well, I mean, look at Australia, you've got
schools and everything.
Well, I mean, Australia, you've got so much wealth underneath the ground. The government's privatised everything. They're privatising the woodlands. They're privatising the water. The Chinese are buying up all the land. And then we've got the situation where privatised water's in dams, water's being not sent to the farmers, not sent to where it should be. There's engineering around the coast of Australia, which seems to indicate that the rain isn't falling on Australia. And this is because we have got all these corrupt governments who are just in it for the money. And as you say, it's about the bankers. And we can now see, never mind population explosion, we can now see in places like Australia with the deaths, unfortunate deaths this past few days in New South Wales, and the numbers of houses now that are being burnt to a cinder. We saw this in California, the fires there, and they're blaming it on global warming because it suits the agenda. And it suits the agenda for many reasons, but as well as to taxes. So it's a case of the people I'm finding now in Australia are actually becoming awake. You've actually got people who are not brainwashed, like in the same way as in the UK, where they're interviewing, the media are interviewing the firefighters and saying to them, well, you know, this is understandable because of global warming. No, they're saying, no, it's not. No. It's not that at all. They've had temperatures far, far hotter in the past in Australia. They've never encountered any situations like this before. I mean, my reports now are there's so many thousands square miles being wiped out, and not so far from residential areas. It's like people are saying Australia's finished.
Yes.
And you know, that's how serious. So never mind. So in actual fact, I'm thinking I've been reading up about legal fiction. I've been reading up about, you know, getting your birth certificate back from the Vatican. When you're faced with fight and flight and, you know, fleeing from floods like we get in the UK, and they're, you know, fleeing for their lives. And I guess more and more people will move into the cities, which is part of the UN agenda.
Precisely.
We've got all the smart motorways being built here. We've got the rollout of the 5G, which is already happening. And it's maybe not so dangerous as they say at first, but they can change the frequencies to make it dangerous.
I 100% agree with you. But also these things like what you were saying about the fires in Australia. Now, I was reading up over the weekend. Actually, I say the weekend is over Christmas. I get muddled up with the days during this time of the year. But apparently, the reason they didn't have bushfires, and this is secondhand information, was because the Aborigines used to, I think during the winter, they used to actually create fires deliberately and burn off the brushwood and whatever. And years ago, they used to do this as a regular thing. I'm sure our Australian viewers will be able to fill me in a lot better on this, because I am out of my comfort zone here. But apparently, as I see it, and I could be wrong, they used to actually manage the woodlands or the bush so that you would not have these massive fires in the summer. And due to new regulations to do with inverted commas to prevent climate change, they've stopped them burning off the woodland like they used to do, and thus preventing these massive fires. And of course, it's caused worse pollution and a worse problem, which I think is maybe from a high level has been done deliberately. It's like here, they're stopping pumping water pumps, pumping water out of places in flat lowland countries so that you do get floods. It's deliberate. And it's so that people think, oh, it's global warming. No, it isn't. It's deliberately done like that. Again, it's PR manipulating people's thought patterns. And I'm pleased to see people are seeing through it and seeing it's a damn lie. And I think it's a lie in Australia, and it's a lie Here, these poor people that are losing their homes either by fire or flood, they're innocent victims in this huge political game of chess.
Well, when I first entered the field of politics, it was very shortly after that point when we had the flooding on the Somerset levels. And I actually went down to see what was really going on. And the RSPB had, they wanted to keep certain amounts of the land for the birds. And then the Environmental Agency, or DEFRA, they had not, what had they not done? They'd not been dredging. And there was a culmination, and you could just see there was somebody high up that went from the RSPB to DEFRA, or DEFRA to RSPB. And of course, all these charities, they're part funded by the EU, and they're all tying their regulations together. So there was nowhere for that water. Basically, there was nowhere for that water to go. If you haven't dredged and you've got lots of land around and about in those particular areas for the birds, which you've kept designated as wetland, waterland, there's nothing. What can you do? Where does the water go? You need to absorb it. Then, of course, you see, we could easily get flooded out because in our cities, we are now becoming so highly built up that you've got so much tarmac. Nobody's got the gardens. If you did have torrential rain in cities, where would that rain go? You would get flooded.
Precisely. And also what they used to do, I mean, I live near sort of wetlands and places like that. Dredgers used to go along and pile the spoil up each side of the embankment so that if the water levels did rise, they wouldn't flood, because you've got these embankments. And also trees. Trees actually absorb a lot of moisture. So that's, I mean, a weeping willow, if you have one near your house, it'll destroy your foundations because it takes up so much water. So nature had a way of stopping these floods, and we're going against nature deliberately to save the planet. So it's lunacy, complete lunacy.
Well, my understanding in Australia is the government is allowing the water to go to some rare crustacean, but the farmers don't get the water. So it's like, this is just bonkers. And can't people see what the government's... And you see, the thing is, we expect the people who run our countries, because we don't really have a choice. We actually just get... And of course, remember, these people don't really have any power. So, you know, there's no way you could get in, for example, in the Houses of Parliament. How would you get 650 good men and women in? You just couldn't do it with the current system we have today. And there should always have been independent candidates. In Australia, it's supposed to go against their constitution, I believe, to have political parties. But of course, they do have political parties like they have in the UK. In fact, I think it was, my understanding is that Prince Philip set up the Green Party in Australia.
Really? I didn't know that.
Somebody please let us know any more details on that, because that's something I haven't researched yet, because there's just so much else going on. I mean, what are these disarmament reintegration officers going to be doing in the United Nations?
Precisely. And also, when you look at the Green Party, they're very good at, shall we say, they're good illusionists, because they're pushing people away from the real issues, such as 5G. Nothing at all about 5G, nothing at all about dredging rivers. All it is all this nonsense about global warming, which if you've only got to look into it slightly, you'll see it's to actually tax us. And it's all to do with United Nations Agenda 2030, which is genocide, basically. And this idea that CO2 carbon neutral, well, CO2 is plant food, and there was double, I think much higher. I'm not sure if it's double the amount of CO2 during the medieval period than now. So what caused it in the medieval period? Was it Dobbin eating too many carrots or something? I mean, it's nonsense, complete nonsense. When the Romans were in Britain, they could actually grow, they had grapevines up in up north because it was like a Mediterranean climate here. And we had higher levels of CO2. So again, it's just complete and utter, it's a con, a huge con, because when you look into the so-called scientists that are telling you that the world is coming to an end and all that, you look at the percentages, they're playing with percentages, because it isn't 99% of scientists that say that there's global man-made warming. It's about, I think it's something like 75% of 1% that think that humans could have something to do with it. So they're just manipulating figures. And why is it? Oh, God.
If they say that humans are responsible, well, I would suggest that any humans that are responsible for any changes are generally the corporatists.
Yes. Yes.
With the industrial complexes, but you know they're itemizing this per country, as in they're checking our output on emissions, and of course we have had huge numbers of people moving in, and these people will want a car as well. So that's why I think now they're going to force us out of our cars, force us into smart cities. How will they do that? Well, they need us out of the countryside. They'll need us out of small places into the big places. And I mean, Bristol is heading now for, and I think it was on the news yesterday, that York is going to be the first place in the country to ban vehicles from its centre unless you have a disability badge.
Disability badge, yes. Oh, well, I think that, I mean, let's look, I mean, we looked on the negative side of things. What can we do? It's nice to see people waking up, but people are not waking up fast enough. Now, can we imagine, supposing as I said earlier, we drew a line and we said we got a government into power that was not traitors, but working for the people. Now, I don't believe that can be done through our so-called democratic joke system. I think it would have to come from outside Westminster, because some of the greatest changes have always come from outside Westminster. Because when you think of who rules the country, who voted for the banksters? Anybody? No. Who voted for civil servants?
But even if you've got 650 people, good people, the councils are not reporting to Parliament necessarily. They're reporting directly to the United Nations, because you see, these are all corporations. So we need the removal of their corporate status. We need the removal of the corporate status of Parliament if that was ever to continue. But what also was interesting for me was the fact that Claire Perry, the Tory MP who lives, well, she used to live in Wiltshire. I think she's moved away now. But are we saying, is she passing a message to us saying that Parliament is not going to be around in the next few years anyway? Well, because wasn't it a good number for these MPs to do pretty well? Not a great deal, because they had no power. So why has she moved on out of Parliament? Like the others, I'm sure a lot of the others already have jobs lined up. Does this mean, is this subliminal messaging that in actual fact, we're not going to tear up that Lisbon Treaty? We will, by 2022 or thereabouts, become part of the EU superstate.
Oh, we will. I think that's definitely on the lines. But really, when you look at the EU, when Heath got us into what was then the common market in 1973, yes, there was no election to say, should we go into the common market or not? It was to do with, it was sold, or people were told that it was to do with just trading. And I always remember these leaflets. I wish I would have kept them. I was very young at the time. But it said, will there be an EU? I remember one in particular. There'll be no more wars, so your children won't be conscripted into the army or navy or anything like that. And of course, we won't be ruled or governed by the common market. It's just for trading, so we can actually easily trade. It's so much easier, this trading. But we'll still be I didn't say sovereign country, but we'll still be, have our own ministers, and it's been done over the years. Then it went to the EEC, then became the EEC, and now it's the EU. So we've just literally been sucked into this dictatorship, and now we've got youngsters that have been brainwashed. I mean, let's face it. I've looked at Stephen Fry's pro-EU thing on YouTube, and it's very well done. And I have to say, it is very, if you're a youngster, so you're a millennial, another word I can't pronounce, and you saw that, you think, oh yeah, the EU's fantastic, isn't it? Because they've got the best PR. They can afford to. But when you look at what's really happened, how this country has been destroyed by the common market, EEC, EU, or whatever you want to call it, and it's all undemocratic, you realise that the EU is nothing more than an extension of the banksters' dictatorship. So,
well, yes, I mean, the thing is, I worked for as a campaign training manager for Leave EU, and then I also went across then just before the designation was given. So there's a designation for the Leave group, which is difficult to say if you don't have your teeth in, perhaps. And there was a certain agenda. These groups, some of these groups, Leave groups, they'd actually come out of the government, headed up these teams, and then went back to work for the government. Thinking about it now logically, were they really wanting us to come out? But going back before those Leave groups were formed, there was a group called Change or Go, something like that. And I actually found one of their brochures over Christmas, and there were all these politicians like Hammond, I think, and Boris Johnson and David Cameron, and there were pictures of them with like bubbles out of their mouths saying, if basically essentially if the EU doesn't change, then, and the public want us to leave, then so we shall leave. And of course that wasn't true at all. And I've taken some screenshots of that book, and I'm going to put it on my public profile. I've got an admin team now because I can't post anything. So these pictures are going up on my public profile on Facebook as evidence that this is what was being circulated in 2014. So it really just highlights you cannot trust any politician whatsoever. I mean, they said that Amber Rudd had left her post because as Home Secretary, because of the Windrush scandal. Well, I know that is not true. I mean, she was at the Bilderberger meeting the following month. And I think you normally have to go through protocol if you go to a Bilderberger meeting. But if you're not actually in post as, say, Home Secretary, I'm not even sure whether you need to tell anybody you're going to whiz off to the Bilderberger meeting. But I do know for sure that she did not have to, it was not a resignation, anything to do with the Windrush scandal. It's like the guy, I can't remember the guy now, he was in the military, and he then had put his hand on somebody's knee, and then he got carted away. That information came out from the whip's office as and when. That information had been known for a very long time. So everything is planned. Everything is contrived. And when you go back to the usury, I mean, I did a video a few days ago on usury, and if we don't, kick the bankers out, that was the title, Kick the Bankers Out. And it's, all these mentions of recessions and crashes and stagnations, these are all, and the currency fluctuations, these are all contrived by the powers that be. We don't need this.
Right. Well, you know as well as I, and the politicians know, that any politician that stands up and says, let's abolish usury, they will probably end up in a wooden overcoat. And they know it. Because when you look at history, nearly every politician, with the exception of few, that have advocated the abolition of usury has ended up in a wooden overcoat. They've been assassinated. They've been killed. But what I would like to sort of cover a little, just briefly, is this strange new cult of worshipping Boris Johnson, because people are believing him. Now, the man is an absolute out and out liar. And I was talking to some people the other day, and they said, oh, we've got to leave the EU because Boris is going to do it. Oh, we trust old Boris. I wouldn't trust that man to tell me what the weather's like outside. I'd check out the window if he told me. If I shook hands with him, I'd count my fingers afterwards. I mean,
well, I've done a video. I've done a couple of videos about Boris, and I've actually got evidence of just a fraction, I guess, of the things that he has done, and this is reportable misdemeanors on the internet. I'm talking about work. I'm not talking about personal life. I'm just talking about work situations, even to the fact, and I may have mentioned this to you before, just before I flew over to Perth in November, I had I think it was the Independent, actually. It was one of the papers you get given as you board a plane. And it said Boris was on the campaign trail, and he said he wasn't going to have a drink until after the general election. And 20 minutes later, he was pictured with a pint. Now, if you make those sorts of statements, you know, whether he goes home and has 10 pints, I'm not bothered. But it's the fact, you know, we don't know what we don't know, and it doesn't matter. When I'm talking about a work situation, it's not good PR. And actually, to me, if he can do that 20 minutes later, I think he's taking us. I think, to me, it shows he's taking us for numpties. And well, I mean, if anybody did vote for him, there you go. Well, that's what he's taking for, a numpty.
Well, I really do think that if the reincarnation of Stalin or Chairman Mao came back and they had the best PR, people say, oh, yes, he's ever so nice. He likes animals, and they always make sure they shoot people with a clean gun. Isn't that nice? And people would vote. You look at the beginning of the war. I remember the Falklands War. When it first started, they showed you army recruiting offices with queues of blokes wrapping around the corner. Huh? Go along to go and get maimed, killed, to an island that's Britain's not under any threat. I mean, what is it? And, you know, I've often said, look at kamikaze pilots. Now, I've found out that kamikaze pilots, they were actually blackmailed into it. And a lot of them weren't fanatics, and they really didn't want to do it. And they had planes standing by watching, made sure that they did kill themselves. But if we wanted people to splatter themselves all over enemy battleships in this country, and you got the top PR agencies in London, I'm sure, and they wanted kamikaze pilots, you'd have a queue of people. Oh, yeah, I want to be, they won't call it kamikaze, but they say enlightenment pilots. And they say, oh, yes, I want some free training to, and do you think how healthy it is to fly in an open cockpit? Oh, it's very good, you know, and oh, I'm proud of my son, you know, he's going to be an enlightenment pilot.
We're talking about fake news as well, aren't we? I mean, fake news is the media reporting that there has been a low take-up rate of going into the military. Well, I now question everything that they say. Why, if that is the case, why? And so is this a reason for them to take us into the superstate one world military? Remember, they've got all these EU projects, 50 projects on the cards. So that could be a reason. The fact is as well that in the future, wars are not going to necessarily be using men in tanks and machine guns. It's going to be, and planes necessarily, they're going to be using drones. So do we need, you can be sat at your desk and creating World War III from your desk and then go home to your family in the evening. And that's just one type of war that we have. But, you know, as we've seen from in Australia, it seems to be the government that it's easy now for the elites to create these situations which are like wars, aren't they?
Well, they're wars on the people's minds, because my theory is, I've been asking this question for a long time. There's different theories about it. How comes in France we've got the yellow vests, which have been infiltrated, but they are bringing France to a halt? And in Britain, we have a couple of yellow vests go out and it rains. I think, yeah, don't go home, you're going to get wet. And my personal feeling is that 1066, and people think, what's he talking about 1066 for? But 1066, people don't realise that this country was enslaved. We were literally slaves to the Norman conquest. And since then, the average person has been kicked down, kicked down, kicked down, and kicked down. And I think Britain and Ireland, we're like puppy dogs that have been abused. And, you know, you just shout slightly and everybody says, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, straight away. Because in France, I think it's a different situation. Because it was the French, believe it or not, that brought World War I to an end, because 2 French regiments, I've probably said this before and I'm boring people now, actually mutinied, and many others were threatening to do the same. The German Navy mutinied and got armed and then started to march towards Berlin. And it was the people, they keep this silent, that brought World War I to an end. What did the British do? Oh, yes, we do exactly what we're told, you know. Wow. But no, they do, oh, yes, and we do what we're told. It's not a criticism. It's just that I think we've just been browbeaten so much. You think of what this country's been through, whereas France, possibly yes and no. It's a different mentality as well, because they're more rural people. We're more, there's more people in cities and towns in this country than in France. And it's a different type of mentality. But I noticed the Yellow Vests are very patriotic, and what I like about it, there's no overall leader, which is brilliant, because there's, you know, they want to speak to a leader and they can't. But really, going back to what we were saying about elections, do you think Macron really got democratically elected into power?
No, but is that your phone? Oh, Chris.
Can you, I'm actually live on air at the moment. Yes. No, your plans did go into the planners with a love letter saying love and kisses. And you know how much I love planners, but I can't go on about that because I'm actually live on air. Okay. See you, June. Thanks. Bye. Sorry about that.
Can't get stuff.
Bringing work into this, you know.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I'd better scoot on, because I've got a call waiting from Australia, and they have such dire situations over there. So, yeah, I've got them on speed dial at the minute in Australia. So this is where we need to come together.
Sorry, I'm live on air. Can I phone you back? Thanks. Bye. Yeah. The thing is that
wasn't the United Nations, was it?
No, it's actually the EU. So, you know, they're saying can have a word with Nigel. You know, so. Yeah.
Oh, really?
But before we go, no. On air. Can you please? I'll phone you back. Thanks. Bye.
Did you not pull the circuit out?
I think
Is this not a professional film studios that I'm in at the moment?
Oh no.
Is this your first day on the job?
But I'll have to pull. I think I'll have to pull. But no, what?
Right. Okay. So Chris, just to finish off with.
Sorry.
Just to finish off with, because I'm going to have to scoot.
As you know, Caroline has a lot of knowledge of the EU, and what we're planning to do is, I was going to be the devil's advocate, but I detest the EU. So how can I be the devil's advocate? I can't fight. I can't go against.
If you've got any questions to ask me, if you've got any questions, can you send them into the show, please? Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me on your show. I think you're going to have to cut quite a bit of this film out.
I think I'm going to have to, because
you have to edit.
Someone loves me.
I don't know about that. Okay, then you best wind it up, because you're going to have another call in 2 seconds.
Caroline will be back. Hopefully, is that okay next Thursday? And it's
going to have to be 2 weeks today.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. I'm not going to have Wi-Fi next week.
Oh dear. Ah, what is?
I don't know. It might be very nice not having Wi-Fi.
Is it the EU? Sorry, I'll just let it ring.
Is that Mrs. Merkel on the phone?
Sorry?
Is that Mrs. Merkel? Anyway, as I say, I've got a call to make. So lovely to speak to you, Chris. You're going to have to get rid of these phone calls. You're going to have to pull the plug out of the wall.
Do you think, can anybody think of a polite way that I can tell my clients in my business to sod off? If they can, you know.
Right, well, I've got to go. Australia beckons. Take care. And thanks to everybody for watching and listening and having the patience to sit and listen to the phone ringing all the time. We just hope it's not the United Nations.
Well, it's a bit different.
Maybe it's because I put in for this job application for the disarmament reintegration officer role. Bye for now.
See you. Thanks, Caroline. Bye.
Bye.